Hey guys, it's John Ribs with my Slay the Spire, very basic, talking about the different resources in Slay the Spire, and we're going to talk about cards for this one. And we're in a fight with an Eggman, egg robot thing, whatever. He's sort of irrelevant to what we're talking about. This is sort of interesting. He doesn't wake up if you don't attack him on the first 3 turns, I think. I think you get 3 turns before he wakes up. So we want to, wait and, just get that out of the deck and make him vulnerable and stuff, and then maybe next turn we attack him. So, cards are extremely intuitive and simple, and they're also very, very, very complicated in this game. Very, very, very complicated. So, let's talk about this. We start the game with 10 cards in our deck, and on this run, we've been putting completely random stuff in the deck. Don't look at this, but in this run we've ended up with 12 cards now. We transformed a strike into a second wind and picked a pommel strike and a shockwave, which isn't actually that unreasonable. The defend plus is pretty unreasonable, but anyway, that's what we've been doing. It's not even that unreasonable. If we add cards to our deck after every fight, every time we get offered a card reward, if we add a card to our deck's going to start getting larger and larger and larger. And right now, early on in the game, we're getting offered cards like an unupgraded Pommel Strike. This is a strong common. It gets much stronger if it's upgraded. Deals 10 damage and draws 2 cards. Or we're getting offered cards like Shockwave, which is, this is an okay uncommon. It upgrades to last longer. I don't actually know how valuable that upgrade is. It's moderately valuable. Obviously more valuable if the combat's going on longer. But what's the point of making stuff vulnerable for 5 turns if you aren't good at killing stuff? I don't know. So in this game, we're very, very, very rigidly forced through the progression of the enemies. Every time we click on a new room, the enemies are getting, the enemies are progressing a little bit. And as we get to the end of the first act, which is a very set number of rooms away, we're fighting a boss, and then we're doing the second act, and so on. The enemy progression is very known to us. We know how strong the elites are going to be. We know a lot of stuff about exactly how this game is working. We also know that the cards we're offered as rewards get better as the run goes on. And so there are a couple of things pulling us in 2 different directions here. One thing is we want to make sure that our deck is strong enough to beat what's on the next floor at all times, because otherwise we're going to die. And ideally, we'd like to be able to kill the elites, because they give the best rewards of any of the fights. If we can kill the elites, that would be great. And so we might want to put cards like Pommel Strike in our deck. An unupgraded Pommel Strike, there's no question that this is better than a Strike, right? It's just that no one would ever say that Strike is better than Pommel Strike here. They'd be like, well, Perfected Strike deals more damage if you have cards with Strike in the name in your deck, so Strike is better than Pommel, and then they'd be like, oh, Pommel Strike has Strike in the name too. Anyway, Pommel Strike is clearly better than Strike, but we don't have to put Pommel Strike in our deck, because think like 10, 15 floors ahead, and you're getting offered a Pommel Strike plus all of a sudden. And you've been able to take 2 or 3 of the strikes out of your deck, and maybe 1 of the defends out of your deck. If you take these 4 cards out of the deck, and you have the option to have this Pommel Strike plus, all of a sudden this Pommel Strike is starting to look a lot less exciting than maybe the other cards that you're getting. Maybe you have some powers in your deck now that you really want to get in play in the first couple of turns, but you're drawing this Pommel Strike and having to spend an energy to just deal 9 damage and draw another card, and then you have 1 less energy and you need to play your really good power. Maybe you're getting cards which just have to be drawn. Something like Offering. Offering is, I think it's the second best card of the game, actually, but Offering is an incredible card which costs 0 energy, draws you cards, gives you energy. It's completely nuts. Maybe you want to have a thin deck so that you can draw your Offering as quickly as possible. So the point is that as you add more cards to your deck right now, it becomes immediately stronger. And these weak cards, like Defend and Strike, become a lower proportion of your deck. So your deck is stronger on average. But later on, it may be harder to put together very strong synergies. And there's another facet to this, which is that a lot of enemies in this game, and a lot of the toughest fights in the game, you'll be getting bad stuff put in your deck. You'll be getting curses or dazes or wounds placed in your deck throughout this game. And the bigger your deck is, the lower proportion of your deck those cards are. So aiming for a deck with like 10 cards in it and trying to just like get rid of all the bad cards and upgrade all the other cards, if you can pull that off, it'll probably be very, very strong. But even still, if you pull off that 10 card only strong deck, and then you fight against an enemy and it puts 4 burns in your deck on the first turn, like 27% of your deck is burns now or something. Whereas if you just had 25 cards in your deck, less than a sixth of your deck would be burns at the moment. So, I'm sure I got those numbers wrong. Anyway, you want to put the right amount of cards in your deck. You want to skip cards quite often, but you do want to make sure that you're fleshing your deck out to a point where it's strong enough to take the fights that you want to take. And you may want to be taking elite fights, and obviously you have to take the Act 1 boss fight, so you want to keep that in mind. And you want to make sure that it is resilient against enemies which put status effects in your deck, whether that's by having such strong cards that the statuses don't even matter. Maybe that's what's going on, strong cards and relic interactions, or maybe it's by having a thick enough deck that the statuses sort of get buried and don't do that much. Or maybe it's just by killing stuff on turn 1 every time. That's fine too if you can pull it off. But I've found that typically the way that cards scale is to look for like a mid-game value-y deck, which is, you know, has like 5 more cards in it than this deck does or something like that. And then go from there. Okay, that was long-winded. Let's talk about another thing that's going on, which is, what card did we take out? Did we take... Oh, we took Shockwave out. Okay. We have 6 cards in our draw pile right now. They are these cards. And we have 0 cards in our discard pile. This is a very important thing to be looking at. We can see what our hand is next turn, basically. It's going to be 5 out of 6 of those cards. If we play our Pommel Strike, which, like, I don't know if that was actually right in the fight, but why not? We now see that we know exactly what our hand is next turn. So manipulating your draw pile and discard pile so that you know what's going on and are able to keep track of what's going on and make sensible decisions is very important in this game. It's very important with the Silent, who has a lot more card draw, to recognize that sometimes you don't want to play your card draw because you know that your hand next turn is good if you don't play it. So let's say I have a hand where I can draw 4 cards and maybe do a little bit more stuff, but I look at my draw pile and there are 5 cards in my draw pile and they combine for really good hand next turn, and I already have plenty of good stuff to do this turn. It just might not be necessary to draw those 4 cards, just guarantee that you have a strong hand next turn instead. Because it's possible to shuffle your deck and shuffle it in ways where your hand isn't that great, especially if you have a lot of cards which are only doing damage or something like that, or there are statuses in your deck or something like that. That's an important thing to think about. Another thing to think about is, let's go to a point where we shuffle our deck again. We should have bashed, whatever, don't worry. So here we have 0 cards in our draw pile, right? And 6 cards in our discard pile. So at the end of our turn, we're going to put all of these cards into our discard pile. And then we're going to shuffle our discard pile and put it back into our deck. And then we'll draw 5 cards. So, cool stuff. Let's do that. Now, because I played Second Wind, we have fewer cards in our deck now. Playing Second Wind was maybe not great, but we now have only 4 cards left in our draw pile. So we know that these 4 are in our hand next turn. Another thing we know is that we will shuffle up our discard pile, put it in our draw pile, and draw a card next turn, because we need 1 more card than that. What that means is that we're going to have a draw pile which doesn't have these cards in it. So these cards are going to skip an entire rotation of our deck. And it doesn't matter as much when you have a 9-card deck, but if you have like an 18-card deck, you have to be careful. If you really care about one card, you want to make sure that when your discard pile gets shuffled into your draw pile, that card you care about should be in your discard pile if you want to play it as much as possible. So if I have like a 0-cost card in my hand, and I'm about to shuffle my discard pile into my draw pile, there's a decision point there. Do I want that 0-cost card to be in my draw pile again, or would I rather have a draw pile that doesn't have it in it so I don't have to draw it? Is it good or is it bad? Let's say I have Neutralize as the silent, and my enemy already has 5 weak. I have to decide, do I want to draw Neutralize again, deal a little bit of damage, but the weak isn't really relevant? Or would I rather just not play Neutralize right now, play a card draw spell, shuffle my deck without Neutralize in it, and then my deck is thinner and I get to draw the other cards, which might be more important instead. So managing this draw pile and discard pile, and keeping in mind that your cards in hand, when your discard pile gets shuffled into your draw pile, these cards in hand are not put back in your draw pile, is very important. A common thing I see is people, when I'm playing with a deck which has a lot of wounds in it and card draw in it, people are asking, why aren't you discarding your wounds? If you play a card which draws 2 cards and discards 2 cards, why don't you just discard your wounds? Why are you discarding other cards? And the reason is, I don't want to put the wounds in the discard pile when I shuffle my deck. I want to shuffle my draw pile and have a bunch of cards that aren't those wounds, and it's fine to just hold them in hand right now. Very important and very complicated to manipulate this draw pile and discard pile, and there's a ton of stuff going on. Here's something completely ridiculous that I can bring up. Let's say you get 10 cards in an Ironclad deck, and you add an 11th card, and it's a very strong card. And then you go to an event and you have an option to remove a card or transform a card. You might be thinking, I can transform my strike and it will turn into a better card. And you might be thinking, I can remove a strike and it will get out of the deck and that more important card will get drawn more often. That's cool. Something to think about on top of that is if you have 11 cards in your deck, there's 1 card in your deck that you don't draw until turn 3. And then you, again, will not shuffle it into that next draw pile. So you won't draw it the next time until like turn 6. So having an 11 card deck is much higher variance than having a 10 card deck in terms of that last 11th card gets played far less often than the first 10 cards do for the first like 5 turns of the combat, which is probably the entire combat. So in that situation, if you want to maximize your one really strong card, you may really want to remove a card to make sure that it's not the 11th card, especially if you need it not to be the 11th card, like if you're going to fight an elite and if it's the 11th card you might lose. Something to think about. Deck size and shuffling your draw pile is a very complex and very important thing. Okay, man, I feel like I talked about that for a long time. Cards are such an important resource. Okay, there's one other thing to talk about with cards. This will just be really rapid. It's that if we run out of cards before we run out of energy, our energy doesn't get to do anything. So you might look at a card that costs 0. Slice for the Silent is a great example. It costs 0, it deals 5 damage to an enemy, and you might think to yourself, what a cool card, I can play it every time I draw it. And you might draft lots of those cards and put them all in your deck. And then you draw a hand and you have 4 slices and a defend in it. And you play your 4 slices and you play your defend and you have like 2 energy left. And you didn't do anything with it. So keep in mind that drawing a card is pretty difficult. It's not that easy to draw cards in this game. And you want to make sure that the cards you're drawing are worth drawing and worth playing. People all the time tell me, like, take that card, it's free, because they see that it costs 0 energy. But energy isn't the only resource here. Cards are a resource, and cards are a very important resource, and manipulating this resource is one of the most complicated and intricate aspects of playing the game at the highest possible output or whatever. So, think about this a ton. I hope I've given you, you know, a basic starting point to start thinking. Cards. Yeah, cards. All right.